I took the warehouse job because I needed the money and I wasn't proud about it. I was 26, freshly out of a relationship that had taken most of my savings, and I was behind on everything: credit cards, car payment, phone bill. I had applied to probably 30 places in 2 weeks. The warehouse called back first. It wasn't glamorous. 12-hour overnight shifts loading and unloading freight. Cold in the winter and unbearable in the summer. But it paid $19 an hour, and they needed people immediately. I started the following Monday. The facility was massive. A long gray building on the edge of an industrial park with maybe 200 employees spread across 3 shifts. On the overnight crew, though, it was smaller, maybe 40 people. You got used to the same faces pretty fast. Most of the guys were fine. Quiet, tired, just trying to get through the shift. But there was one person I noticed almost immediately. His name was Dale. Dale was in his mid-40s. He had been there for almost 11 years, which made him something like an unofficial elder on the floor. He wasn't a supervisor. He didn't have any real authority, but he acted like he did. He would correct new employees in front of everyone, loudly, about things that didn't even matter. He'd tell you that you were stacking the pallets wrong, or that you were walking the wrong route across the floor, or that you were taking too long on break. Little things. But he said them with this heavy, serious tone, like he was your commanding officer. The actual supervisors let him do it because he was experienced, and it saved them from having to babysit newer employees themselves. So Dale had carved out this unofficial little kingdom on the overnight shift, and everyone just accepted it. I wasn't great at accepting things like that. The first time he corrected me, I thanked him and kept doing it my way, because my way was also correct. He stood there for a second like he wasn't sure what had just happened, then walked off. After that, he watched me differently. I can't fully explain how I knew. It wasn't anything I could point to at first. It was more of a feeling, the way you feel when someone is staring at the back of your head. I'd glance up from whatever I was doing, and he'd be nearby, pretending to check a clipboard. Or I'd come back from the bathroom, and he'd be leaning against a shelf close to my workstation. Nothing I could report. Nothing that sounded like anything if I said it out loud. But it was constant. About 3 weeks in, I started parking closer to the entrance because the walk across the lot at 5 a.m. was long and dark and lonely. One morning I was walking to my car after my shift ended, and I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. Dale was there, maybe 20 feet back, hands in his jacket pockets. "Cold morning," he said. "Yeah," I said, and I kept walking. He matched my pace. I walked faster. He walked faster. I got in my car and fumbled with my keys, and he stopped a few spots away, at a car that I had never seen him at before. He unlocked it with a key fob, got in, and sat there. He didn't leave. He just sat in his car while I sat in mine, and I could see the dark shape of him through his windshield. I drove away first. I told myself I was being paranoid. People leave work at the same time. It doesn't mean anything. But the next morning, he was parked in a different spot, closer to me. And the morning after that, he was parked right next to me. I brought it up to my direct supervisor, a younger guy named Trevor. I told him that Dale seemed to be following me to my car every morning, and that it was making me uncomfortable. Trevor looked like I had just told him something very inconvenient. "Dale's just old-fashioned," Trevor said. "He's probably trying to look out for you. The lot can be sketchy." I didn't ask him to look out for me, I said. Trevor told me he'd mention it. I don't think he ever did. About a month into the job, we had a mandatory safety training. The whole overnight crew sat in the break room for 2 hours while a guy from corporate walked us through emergency procedures. I was sitting near the back. Halfway through, I felt something on my arm. It was a folded piece of paper. Someone had passed it down the row. I unfolded it under the table. It said, "I've been watching you since day one. I know what kind of person you are. We should talk." Just us. D. My stomach dropped. I looked up. Dale was 4 seats to my right. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the presenter with a completely neutral expression, like he had done nothing, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. After the training, I went straight to HR. The HR coordinator was a woman named Patricia. I put the note on her desk and explained the parking situation, the staring, all of it. She read the note twice. Then she looked up at me. "Do you feel like you're in danger?" she asked. I thought about it. "I don't know," I said. "That's the problem. I don't know what he wants." She told me she would open a file and speak to Dale directly. She said to keep documenting anything that happened. That evening, Dale was not on the floor. I thought maybe Patricia had already spoken to him, maybe even sent him home. But at 3 a.m., I was in the back section of the warehouse, the part that was older and less trafficked, pulling orders off a high shelf. It was loud back there because of the ventilation system, this constant hum that swallowed other sounds. I climbed down from the step stool with a box in my arms, and when I turned around, Dale was standing right behind me. I almost dropped the box. He was close enough that I had to step back to not be touching him. "Patricia talked to me," he said. His voice was completely calm. "You shouldn't have done that." "Please move," I said. "I'm trying to be your friend," he said. "You keep making it hard." "I'm going to scream if you don't move right now," I said. Something changed in his face. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like disappointment, like I had failed some test he'd been running. He stepped aside. I walked fast all the way back to the main floor and stayed near other people for the rest of the shift. The next day, I came in and found my locker had been opened. The padlock hadn't been cut. The latch was just bent slightly forced. Nothing was missing, but it was clear someone had been inside. A personal photo I kept taped to the inside of the door had been turned upside down. I photographed everything and brought it to Patricia again. She looked tired. She said she would have a more serious conversation with Dale, and that they were reviewing the security footage. I asked her what the footage showed. She paused for just a moment too long. "It's not conclusive," she said. I stopped sleeping well. I started texting my roommate my location every morning when I left work, just so someone knew. I took different routes home. I checked my mirrors constantly. 3 days later, I was finishing my shift. I went to the women's locker room to change out of my steel-toed boots. The locker room had 2 sections with a short hallway between them. I was in the first section, sitting on the bench. The lights in the second section were off, which wasn't unusual. I was untying my second boot when I heard breathing. Not the ventilation system, not pipes, breathing. Slow and even. I went completely still. The locker room was supposed to be women only. The door had a coded lock. Employees had to badge in. I looked at the hallway, leading to the dark section. I couldn't see anything, but the breathing continued. I did not run. I want you to understand how hard that was. Every single part of my body wanted to run, but the only exit was past that hallway. So instead, I very slowly, very quietly reached back into my locker and wrapped my hand around a can of dry shampoo I kept in there. It wasn't a weapon, but it was something. I stood up. I said, loud and clear, "I know someone is in here. I'm calling security right now." The breathing stopped. Then I heard the sound of someone standing up from the floor. I hit the emergency call button on the wall. It was a red button near the door that I had never thought I would actually press. A buzzer went off somewhere in the building. I kept my back to the wall and my eyes on that hallway. 2 security guards came through the door in under a minute. They searched the second room. They found a badge scanner on the back wall that had been tampered with. The lock on the external door in that section had been held open with a piece of folded cardboard, preventing it from latching. Someone had propped it open from the inside. Dale was not in the building. His shift had officially ended an hour earlier, but his badge had not been used to exit through the main entrance. The security team reviewed the footage and found that he had exited through a side emergency door at the beginning of the shift, then re-entered through the back of the women's locker room, while it was still unoccupied, and stayed. The police were called. When they went to Dale's apartment, they knocked for several minutes with no answer. A neighbor said she had seen him leave with a large bag around 4 a.m. He had known the security alarm would be triggered. He was gone. The police put out a notice. His car was found abandoned in 2 towns, over near a bus station. He had been planning to run. They caught him 6 weeks later in another state, living under a different name. He had done something similar at a previous job 7 years earlier, that case had been handled quietly by the company, and he had never been formally charged. This time, I did not go back to that warehouse. I finished my last paycheck over the phone, mailed him my badge, and never set foot in that building again. I still check my mirrors. I probably always will. Everyone warned me about the difficult ones when I started at the firm. They told me which partner had a temper, which assistant was territorial about the coffee machine, which paralegal you didn't want to be stuck with during a filing deadline. Nobody warned me about Renee, because Renee was friendly. She was the friendliest person in the building. She was in her mid-30s, always perfectly put together, always smiling. She remembered everyone's birthday, brought homemade food to the break room on Fridays, asked about your kids or your parents or your dog by name. In a law firm full of stressed, competitive people, she was the one everyone exhaled around. I liked her immediately. Most people did. I was a junior associate, fresh out of school, trying to prove myself, making every mistake you make when you're new and terrified of looking incompetent. Renee took me under her wing within my first week. She showed me how the filing system worked, which judges preferred their briefs formatted a certain way, where to get lunch that wouldn't cost half a day's salary. She saved me from several embarrassing mistakes early on. I trusted her. I told her things. That was my first mistake. It happened so gradually that I genuinely didn't see it until the damage was done. It started with information, small things I had shared in confidence. I told Renee that I was struggling with a case assignment that I thought was above my current experience level. The next week, one of the senior partners called me into his office and said he'd heard I was having trouble managing my workload, and was he giving me too much too soon? I was mortified. I hadn't told anyone else. Only Renee. When I confronted her gently, she looked genuinely horrified. "Oh my God," she said, covering her mouth. "I think I accidentally mentioned something to Marcus when he was asking about the team. I was trying to stick up for you. I am so sorry." She teared up a little. I felt guilty for even bringing it up. I told myself it was an accident, but then it happened again. I confided in her that I had concerns about a decision one of the partners was making on a case. Not even seriously, just venting. The kind of thing people say when they're tired and frustrated. 2 weeks later, that partner pulled me aside and was very cold, very pointed in his questions about whether I was happy at the firm. I couldn't prove anything. I never could. That was the thing about Renee. She never left fingerprints. The problem was that she had become my primary social connection at the office. I had let her become the person I talked to, and she had constructed herself as completely indispensable. When I started pulling back, she noticed immediately. She started checking in on me more, stopping by my office multiple times a day, texting me after hours. Little things that sounded caring. "So your light on, are you okay? Brought you tea. I'll leave it by your door. Heard you had a rough call today. Do you want to grab dinner?" It felt like affection. Looking back, it was surveillance. She started doing something that I can only describe as collecting material. She would ask me questions that seemed conversational but were really probes. How are things with your supervising partner? Do you feel like the senior staff respects you? Have you thought about whether this firm is really the right fit? At the time, I thought she was being emotionally supportive. What she was actually doing was building a file. 6 months into the job, I was being considered for an accelerated track. It was competitive. Only one junior associate would be selected. I found out later that Renee had also applied for a lateral promotion that would have put her on the same track. That's when it accelerated. Within 2 weeks, 3 separate senior staff members found independent reasons to pull me aside and express vague concerns. One said she'd heard I was dismissive with clients. One said there were questions about my attention to detail. One said, almost apologetically, that there was some concern about my attitude toward the more experienced staff. None of it was true, but it was consistent. Too consistent to be coincidence. I started keeping notes. I wrote down every conversation I had with Renee, every veiled comment, every question she asked me. I paid attention to the timing of things. I started to see the pattern. The final piece came from someone unexpected. one of the administrative assistants, a quiet woman named Gloria who had worked at the firm for 15 years, stopped me in the hallway one afternoon. "I don't like to get involved," Gloria said, "but I've watched her do this before. To someone else, 3 years ago. That person left the firm." She said it in almost a whisper. Then she walked away. I went home that night and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I thought about how warm Renee had been, how safe she had made me feel, how completely I had trusted her, and how systematically she had used everything I had given her. I requested a private meeting with the managing partner. Just him, just me, no HR buffer. He was old school, direct. I knew he respected people who came to him without drama. I brought my notes. I laid it out clinically. I told him about the pattern of conversations, the timing of the concerns raised about me, the things only Renee would have known. I told him I wasn't asking him to punish anyone. I was asking him to consider whether the feedback he'd received about me was coming from a single source, and whether that source had something to gain from my not being selected. He was quiet for a long time. "I'll look into it," he said. I don't know everything that happened after that meeting. The firm was not the kind of place where outcomes were announced publicly, but Renee was moved to a different department within a month. The lateral promotion she had applied for was not filled, and I was selected for the accelerated track. She sent me an email the day the announcement went out. It was 3 sentences. "Congratulations. You worked hard. You deserve it." I read it twice. Then I deleted it without replying. I don't think she was a monster. I think she was someone who had learned early that warmth was a tool and that close relationships produce leverage, and she had practiced it so long that she couldn't separate the genuine feeling from the strategy anymore. Maybe there was no strategy. Maybe it was just how she was built. That almost makes it worse. I was a closing manager at a 24-hour printing shop for 2 years. It wasn't a complicated job. We handled business orders, poster prints, binding, that sort of thing. The overnight shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It was usually just me and one other employee. Quiet, routine, occasionally a rush job from a student or a business with a morning deadline. The other employee when I started was a man named Victor. Victor was 50-something, heavy-set, with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of stillness that you don't know whether to call calm or cold. He had worked there for 8 years. He knew the machines better than anyone. He rarely smiled, but he wasn't unfriendly, exactly. He was just very contained. He answered questions directly and didn't offer anything extra. We fell into a rhythm. We worked alongside each other for months without any problems. He showed me the quirks of the older machines, how to handle the paper jam in the wide format printer, which ink cartridge brand lasted longer. Practical things. Useful things. I thought we had a decent working relationship. Quiet but functional. The first sign was small enough to dismiss. We had a shelf in the back room where employees kept personal items. Jackets, bags, the occasional snack. I came in one evening, and my tote bag had been moved. I kept it on the right side of the shelf. It was now on the left. Victor was the only other person who had been in the building. I mentioned it. He said he hadn't touched it. I believed him. I thought maybe I had placed it differently without noticing, but it kept happening. Small displacements. My jacket hung on a different hook than where I left it. A notepad I used for order tracking moved from the counter to a drawer. My water bottle relocated from one end of the workstation to the other. None of it was alarming enough to report. It was just disorienting. It created this low-level unease, like the building had a pulse I couldn't locate. Then I started noticing the questions. Victor began asking about my schedule outside of work. Where did I live? Was it far from the shop? Did I drive or take the bus? Did I live alone? He asked each question in isolation, weeks apart, in a tone that was casual and conversational. But I started writing them down, and they formed a complete picture. By the end of the 3rd month, he had assembled, piece by piece, a detailed map of my life outside that building. I never answered directly. I deflected, changed subjects, gave vague answers. But he was patient. He had time. One night, It was about 2 a.m., and we were in the middle of a large order, 500 flyers for a business conference. The machines were running loud. I stepped into the back to retrieve more paper stock, and when I came out, Victor was standing at my workstation with his back to me. He had my phone in his hand. I had left it face up on the counter. "What are you doing?" I said. He turned around unhurriedly. He set the phone back down. "It buzzed," he said. "I was checking if it was the order line." We had a dedicated order line. It wasn't my personal phone. We both knew that. I picked up my phone. He had opened my contacts. I could see the app was still on the screen. I stood very still. I kept my face neutral. I said, "Don't touch my phone again," and I walked back to machines. My hands were shaking. I reported it to the district manager the next morning. I explained the phone incident, the moved belongings, the pattern of personal questions. The district manager was sympathetic, but there wasn't much in the policy to act on. Nothing Victor had done was technically a terminable offense. The district manager said he would speak to Victor and remind him about personal boundaries. I don't know what was said between them, but Victor came in the following evening with a different energy. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't even noticeably colder. He was just more deliberate. Every movement calculated. Every glance timed. It felt like being studied. A few nights later, it was raining. We were near the end of the shift, about an hour from close. The shop had been quiet for hours, no customers. Victor had gone to the storage room to do a supply count, which typically took about 20 minutes. 40 minutes passed. I called back to the storage room. No answer. I walked back there. The light was on, but the room was empty. The door to the alley was open a few inches, the one we use for deliveries. Cold air was coming through. I went to the front, locked the customer entrance, and called the district manager. I told him Victor had disappeared during the shift. The district manager told me to stay put, and he would call Victor's cell. I went back behind the counter. That's when I noticed the monitor. We had a single security camera on the exterior of the building, and the feed displayed on a small screen behind the counter. I looked at it. Victor was outside. He was standing in the alley in the rain, not moving. He was facing the wall, just standing there with his back to the camera, coat getting soaked. I watched him for a full 2 minutes. He didn't move. I called 911. I told the dispatcher that I was alone in a closed shop, that my coworker had left through a back alley exit mid-shift and was now standing motionless outside in the rain, and that I did not feel safe. She told me to stay on the line and kept her voice even and professional, which helped me stay calm. Within about 6 minutes, a patrol car pulled up. The officers found Victor in the alley exactly where I had seen him on the camera. They spoke to him for several minutes. He was cooperative. He told them he had needed air, that he sometimes did this, that he had a condition he didn't want to discuss, but that he wasn't a danger to anyone. One of the officers came inside to speak to me. He said Victor had declined medical assistance and was technically free to go since he had done nothing illegal. But he said given the circumstances and my statement about the phone incident and the pattern of behavior, he was going to file a report, and he strongly recommended I do the same in writing. I filed the report. I documented everything I had. The district manager, now holding a police report, had more to work with. Victor was placed on administrative leave the following week while an internal review was conducted. During the review, they discovered that a previous employee from 2 years before my start had filed a nearly identical complaint. That complaint had been marked resolved after a verbal warning. It had not been escalated. It had not been part of any permanent record. Victor was terminated. He didn't react dramatically. He accepted his final check and left the building quietly. I stayed at that job for another 8 months, but I always double-checked that the alley door was fully latched before I started my shift. Some habits don't leave you. About a year after all of this, I got a message on social media from someone I didn't recognize. No profile photo, recently created account, no posts. The message said only, "I heard you're still there." That's a long time. I screenshotted it, sent to the detective who had filed the original report, and blocked the account. I gave my notice the next week. I don't know if it was him. I never found out for certain. I just know that some people show you exactly who they are very slowly, one small movement at a time. And by the time you see the whole picture, you're already in the frame.